So in this video, I'm going to be going through every single map, which means that I'll be going through every single variation as well. And I'm going to be ranking them from worst to best. And I'm going to be including what killer would be good on that map and what perk would be good for a survivor on that map. This is going to be a pretty big video, and I think I've written about 7 pages worth. So we've got a lot to go through. Just a disclaimer that this is my opinion and a mix of opinions that was said in the Dead by Daylight community. So with all that being said, let's start with the first and worst map, Shelter Woods. Words cannot express how much I hate this map. It is such a boring looking map with absolutely nothing going on with it. There is maybe a few jungle gyms or TL walls, and then there's the killer shack. That's about it. Oh yeah, and the main thing about it is a big tree in the middle of the map. I absolutely hate this map as Survivor because there is so many dead zones and so many places where you are unprotected, and it's just an awful map. If you enjoy playing killer though, this is going to be a really good map for you. A killer that you should definitely try out while playing this map is any stealthy killer such as Ghostface or Myers, as you'll be able to stalk people from a very large distance because there's a lot of flat land. And if you play a Survivor, I would highly suggest bringing Sprint Burst or Dead Hard, just so you can get to just anything you can get yourself protected with, because I'm pretty sure there's not that many pallets in this map. Now I can't put Shelter Woods without putting Rotten Fields next. What happens when you get Shelter Woods, you take out the trees and you replace it with corn? You've got yourself Rotten Fields. This map is as simple as you can get. There is a killer shack in the middle, lots and lots of corn, and maybe a harvester, and then a few jungle gyms. This map is awful. This is definitely quite killer-sided, and that's because of the lack of protection that a lot of survivors have, which are around the corners of the map. Luckily, there is a lot of generators in the corners of the map, so I guess that's something the survivors are going for them. It is a relatively small map as well, so killers will not really have much of a hard time with this map, except if you play as a stealthy killer, then just don't even bother. Killers I would suggest for this map is Hillbilly, because he can zip to one corner to the map to another in lightning speed, or Oni, for example. And for Survivor, I would definitely bring Urban Evasion or Fixated just to make use of the corn, or as I said before, bring Sprint Burst to get out of situations. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you saw this coming, but it's time to talk about the notorious Haddonfield map. Now, there is a lot of hate around this map, and it's pretty justified just because it is so heavily survivor-sided. There are plenty of strong loops and pallets pretty much around every corner, and as a killer, you're going to really struggle on this map. But don't worry, survivors also have a bad time because certain generators can only be done by one person. And not only that, but the RNG in terms of its hedges and fences can also ruin a killer or a survivor too. So this map isn't really fun for anyone. In terms of its atmosphere, I actually pretty much enjoy it. It's not too bad. It's the only map with a really urban feel apart from Springwood, so it is pretty unique in terms of its atmosphere. A good killer I would bring for this map is probably someone like the Legion, just so you can vault things a lot more because there's so many places where survivors can vault, or the Spirit because of mind games. For Survivor, I would highly suggest bringing Balanced Landing for obvious reasons of the houses and many places to drop. Next up is Hawkins Laboratory. In my previous map tier list I made last year, I ranked this quite highly based on its atmosphere, and it is still a very good looking map. However, looking at its level design and the pallets, it's just all over the place. Starting off, half the pallets are pretty unreliable. I think survivors only have a few very strong loops which are in the middle of the map, but once they're gone, survivors are really gonna struggle. Not only that, but as a killer, you've got 2 floors to deal with, and this can be quite annoying to maintain. Luckily, the second floor isn't really protected for survivors, and there's only one gen up there, so there's only certain reasons to go up there. I would definitely say that this map is pretty killer-sided, especially if you bring a stealthy killer such as Myers or Ghostface, because there are plenty of line of sight with corridors and loads of corners as well. For survivors, I would highly suggest bringing Life, because it will definitely come in clutch for those really unsafe pallets around the corners of the map. Up next, which is really going to pain me, is Midwich, and this map is absolutely gorgeous. It is one of the best thematic maps out there, and I believe, hands down, this has the best atmosphere in the game. Being a Silent Hill fan as well, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be biased in thinking that it is a very nice looking map. However, there is a major flaw in the level design. First up, it is not beginner friendly at all. Generators are relatively difficult to find. Not only that, but some of the generators are extremely unsafe, and they are scattered across a very big map. The next major problem is that the pallets are relatively useful, while others are very unsafe. There are also some rooms where the door can be blocked, which means that there are only one entry which a killer can easily block. You will also discover that this is easily very killer-sided or survivor-sided, depending on the players. Fast killers are going to enjoy this map, such as the Hillbilly or Wraith, because you can patrol the very long corridors. So bringing those type of killers will be a major advantage to you. For survivors, if you're having trouble finding your way around, bringing windows of opportunity can really help you, so you don't get stuck in a room that only has maybe one pallet and one exit. And if you're new, I would suggest bringing Visionary to find the generators. The more experienced survivors, I would suggest bringing Sprint Burst, because you're really going to need it if you want to get to any sort of safety. So let's talk about another map that is very notorious, which is The Game. And this has had another rework, and it's a little bit better than it used to be. The middle is definitely a lot different and personally a lot better. I can definitely say that there has been an improvement. However, it is still pretty survivor-sided. There are plenty of places to loop as a survivor. There are very strong pallets right next to each other, so you can loop for a good amount of time. The generators are relatively easy to find. You just look for one of the metal doors, and usually they're right around them. Playing as a killer, you are going to struggle a bit. Killers such as Hillbilly or maybe even Huntress is going to have a bit of a hard time using their abilities. However, there are a few killers that actually can make the most of being on this map. As this map is probably the smallest map in the game, you can really utilize the terror radius, or lack of one. Bringing the Doctor with a very high terror radius is going to annoy everyone, and if you enjoy playing Scratch Mirror Myers, you're going to have a lot of fun. I would say the atmosphere has increased so much more in the revamp, and I genuinely love playing on this map. Perks I would bring for Survivor is Dead Hard or Balanced Landing to make the most of the drops, and Dead Hard for extending the really good loops. You could also bring Bond, for example, because aura perks are going to be extremely effective on such a small map. Now, the last indoor map we're going to be talking about is Lery's, which I think is the least offensive indoor map that we have, and it is the best indoor map that we have personally to me. It's a relatively big map, but it's not as big as Midwich, luckily, and it, again, is very survivor-sided. There is tons of windows everywhere, so there is a lot of protection for survivors. The atmosphere in this map is absolutely amazing. They've done a really good job of creating a really eerie tone to this hospital. I enjoy all the little bits of details, from the tapping of the windows to the middle of with all the monitors explaining the Doctor's lore a little bit. Just overall, it's a really nice map to just play on. But unfortunately, yes, in terms of the way the game is, it's just not good for killers at all, and new survivors are going to struggle a little bit finding certain generators. And some generators, depending on the RNG, can only be done by one person, so that's always a good thing, right? A killer suggestion I would say is pretty much bring anyone that isn't the Hillbilly or Leatherface, where you're going to not really use a chainsaw. Scratch Mirror Myers is going to have a field day with this. Ghostface is also going to have a field day as well. For survivors, I would highly suggest bringing the Vault build, because you're going to be vaulting quite a lot of windows. You could also bring Dance With Me and Life as a nice combo. Now finally, for the first outdoor map that isn't completely terrible, which is Yamakoa Estate. Now, they have made a graphical update since my last assessment, and yeah, I still hate it. However, it isn't as bad as it used to be. I can relatively get along with this map pretty well. However, the reason I hate this map still is because of the foliage. I don't have to explain the frustration as a killer when there are urban evading Claudettes in bushes all the time. It annoys both survivors and killers. If you do this,
stop it. Get some help.
The atmosphere wise looks relatively nice, especially in Sanctum of Wrath. It has decent palettes and it's pretty survivor sided. However, it does have the notorious problem where it can be easily 3-gened, which is when all the gens are very close to each other where the killer can easily patrol it. So for this, I would say that bringing a killer who has no problem with tracking and speed will be your biggest advantage, such as the Wraith. For survivors, it is good to take the full effect of the foliage, so bringing Iron Will or Fixated for when you need to hide somewhere. Next is Dead Dog Saloon. It's quite an interesting map. It has a unique appearance with the Western style and the steampunk doors, which complement the atmosphere quite a lot. However, design-wise, has both advantages for both killer and survivor, mainly leaning on the killers. First off, most of the gens are pretty close to each other, making patrolling as a killer a lot easier. This map is also very good for all types of killers, ranging from the trapper hiding bear traps to Ghostface using the large open areas to the Legion to get one area to another pretty easily. For survivors, it does have a few strong loops and pallets, but the others can be a lot more unreliable. I put this map relatively low because of how killer sided it is, and personally I just don't like the dust look on the map. Overall, you can bring whatever killer you like on this map, as there isn't really any main advantages for any certain killers, but for survivors I would take advantage of the height situation, so bringing balanced landing may be very beneficial. The Swamp is next, and I personally really dislike this map purely on how big they are and how dull it is. Much like Yamakoa Estate, immersive survivors are going to have a really good time as it has built-in fog and it will just make immersive Claudettes very happy. Being one of the biggest maps means the killer are going to have a hard time and survivors are going to have an easy time to hide and do gens, especially when all the generators are quite far out from each other. Let's not forget the most irritating horn in the game. There are plenty of strong pallet loops which can be countered by killers such as the Spirit or Nurse. So overall, it's just a boring map, but in terms of its level design, it's not too bad. Although you are going to have a nightmare finding totems, so hexes are going to be very difficult. So hexes will be fun to bring. You will want to take a killer who can move fast, such as the Hillbilly or Nurse. And for Survivor, I would take a perk that would find totems because you're really going to need it. Or just bring a simple fixated perk for that added stealth and agility. Now, we can't talk about generic maps without thinking Ormond. This map is so uncreative and so forgettable as well. Granted, it's the only snow map, but with the generic loops and the large cabin, not much going on, it has a lot to be desired. This map is excellent for killers due to the blood being very obvious to track, which means if you are bad at tracking scratch marks like me, this map is going to be a godsend. I would still say that this map is more survivor sided due to the generators being relatively spread out to avoid 3-genning and quite a few strong loops. Apart from that, I really haven't got that much to say about this map apart from the fact that it's pretty uninspiring. I would recommend a killer like the Legion for his fast pace and seeing blood trail to help him track. And for survivors, I can't really think of any perk that's useful, but maybe balanced landing because there is a few places you can drop off from on this map. Now honestly, I didn't really know where to put Springwood, so I merged them all together and placed them here because essentially they're all very similar. Having 5 variations of this map does give a lot of replayability, which is a nice change. Another thing is that there is breakable walls in the school segment, which is going to make it a little bit more balanced for the killer. Totems are going to be a nightmare to find as some areas are very obscure around bushes. However, for the survivors, there are still plenty of separate generators to do, and there are a few good loops. The atmosphere is pretty nice, however it's nothing that Haddonfield hasn't already done, apart from Freddy's boiler room, which does add a bit of flavour to the map, but that's about it. The killer I would choose for this map is the Nurse, as there are plenty of obstacles that a Nurse can just easily bypass, or you can take a killer like the Spirit. For survivors, it's good to bring Head On. If you get stuck in the basement boiler room, there are plenty of choke points where there are lockers, so you can potentially stun the killer. Moving on, we have the Suffocation Pit. This map is overall a decent map. The atmosphere is relatively nice, plenty of TL walls and loops for survivors. However, there is a major flaw, which can swap the power to the killer, which is the 3-gen trick, which I've explained before in Yamakoa Estate. In my last video, I explained how this map will have an issue with 3 gens left. If all 3 gens are on one side, then the killer is going to have no problem patrolling these generators and therefore pretty much taking the game hostage. As you can see on this map, it has a very small choke point, which is a major flaw on who actually has the power and who doesn't. If the survivors are smart, then they'll have the last gen on the other side, which is then a guaranteed win for survivors. So this all depends on where the survivors are doing gens, and that will depend whether the survivors have the advantage or the killer does. So for the killer, I would bring someone very fast like the Spirit or Hillbilly, just in case the gens have been done properly. And as for survivor, it is very important that you maybe bring something like Better Together, so that other survivors are more encouraged to do that gen with you. Or bring Visionary to see which gens have been done and which haven't. Now I can't add Suffocation Pit without adding Arazov's Resting Place. Yet again, another map with a very small choke point and the 3 gen problem, much like the other map. Now I chose this map over Suffocation Pit because of its atmosphere. I just like the look of Autohaven, even though the level design is pretty much the same. There are plenty of places to vault for survivors, which can be a nightmare for killers who are slow. And personally for me, I enjoy this map for both killer and survivor because of the small choke point. I would suggest bringing the same killers as I suggested from the previous map and the same perks as from the previous map as well, being pretty much similar in different realms. Up next is the Cowshed, and now I had to add this map in mid tier because of how survivor sided this map is. Both the cow tree is a very good loop, and the Cowshed itself can be looped very well as well. Again, it's another map with loads of corns, so of course this is a personal distaste for this map. However, there is a few more things going on compared to Rotten Fields. For killer, this can work in your favor once you have 2 loops that can be countered. It's rather essential to bring Bamboozle for this, as it will stop the looping rather well. I haven't really got much to say apart from it's a relatively boring farm map with some great advantages to survivors and not much to killers. I would highly suggest bringing a killer such as the Clown or Legion to reduce the looping and the strong pallets. And for survivor, I would suggest bringing Sprint Burst or Life, as it will come in handy a lot. Now I don't know about you, but Recco's Yard is very hit and miss. There is plenty of protection for survivors, however there are plenty of dead zones as well. The generator placement as well is near the middle of the map, or right around the corners with little to no protection for survivors. Most of the time, the generators are close to the middle, which makes patrolling as a killer a lot easier. Not only that, but killer's basement is in the middle too, giving the killer an extra advantage. This is quite killer-sided, and it's very much represented on this map. Playing as killer that has the exposed status effect, or such as someone like Myers, can really help out, or playing as Billy for his insta down will be really strong on this map. As a survivor, it's important that you bring Spine Chill so you can get away in situations where you have no protection when doing really risky generators. Blood Lodge is next, and I'm sure there's a theme going on about having dead zones, and this map is pretty big as well. Plenty of jungle gyms and pallets for survivors, but the gem placement, much like the last map, some of them can be very risky as there are dead zones around them as well. A killer might have a hard time too because it is a big map, but bringing a killer such as the Hillbilly will not be a problem. The atmosphere admittedly is quite nice, and it looks something straight out of a horror film. And honestly, I think they've done a pretty good job in creating that atmosphere, which is why it's so high on this list. Another note is that survivors also have a very strong loop at the house itself, so make sure not to commit too much when chasing a survivor around there. As survivor, I would bring Spine Chill again, just in case you are in one of those dead zones. Now we're moving away from dead zones into a huge survivor advantage, which is Groaning Storehouse. This is one of my favorite Macmillan maps. However, from the first second you start playing as a killer on this map, you are going to struggle because survivors usually spawn right next to a gen on different sides. So you're going to have to commit to one side, which means guaranteed one generator is going to pop off within 80 seconds. They did fix a major loop which was around the storehouse, so that is a godsend for a lot of killers. But there is still plenty of really good pallets across the map. The atmosphere is extremely nice. It does have this nice apocalyptic feel to it, which I really appreciate. The few killer advantages is that the killer's basement is usually in the middle, which is a nice thought. I would suggest that as a killer to be a fast killer and bring Corrupt Intervention, because it's going to be really useful. As Survivor, you should bring a Vault build, which consists of Spine Chill and Resilience, as I'd feel like it would massively help in the loop in the middle. Torment Creek is next, and honestly, this map is relatively balanced, and the reason why it's so low on this map, well, it's a Coldwind Farm map, so of course it's not going to be that interesting. What makes it worse is that the fallen down silo is the main piece of that map, and that makes it really bare and dull in my opinion, but where it makes up is its balanced nature for both survivors and killer. I feel like you can be relatively versatile on what killer you can choose on this map, as all killers can benefit from this. Even better is that the corn isn't completely everywhere compared to the other maps, so this makes stealth killers a little bit more viable as well. As a survivor, you will have plenty of strong loops, and even the silo itself has a few pallets around the edges of the silo. So I would say this map isn't too bad. As a killer, I would choose anyone you want, but the trapper and the hag might be relatively viable to cut off from strong loops near the silo. And as a survivor, I can't really think of any strong perps on this map, apart from maybe using life for the cow tree or the silo window. Up next is Gas Heaven. I absolutely love this map, and it's my favourite Auto Haven map in terms of its atmosphere. I really like the 50s style billboard and the garage itself. I think this map has a nice way of setting a scene, and honestly, it's a pleasure to play on this map a lot. If you're a survivor. As a killer, this might be a bit of a nightmare for you, as there are plenty of strong loops for survivors. In the middle of the garage, there are some strong loops with only one generator in the middle inside of the building. This map is also very large, and most of the gens are in corners, making this extremely hard for a killer to even patrol. It's even worse when there's not a line of sight for the killer, as it's all blocked off by large walls made out of cars. Effectively, this map is for survivors playing on easy mode. The only reason I have this so high is because of its aesthetics. As killer, you will need to be a fast killer such as the nurse or hillbilly, and for survivors, bring whatever you want because this map is already easy enough for you. Heading into the top 10, we have Thomson's House, another Coldwind Farm realm, which means that the atmosphere is pretty bad. However, it does complement the large house from a distance, so it does have something going for it. This map is relatively balanced for both survivor and killer. This is because it is a relatively small map, and the middle part of the map is pretty much a death zone for survivors. And funnily enough, this has about 2 gens in the middle as well. So to counteract that, there is huge protection for survivors near the house itself, with plenty of pallets around it, so good survivors will make the most of this. For this, I would bring the Nurse or Spirit, as they will be powerful killers on this map, especially Nurse, so she can blink to the top of the house when needed, as there is a gen up there. As a survivor, it is suggested to have borrow time, because as there are plenty of hooks in the middle where the killer might hook somebody, and that borrow time is going to really come in clutch. Moving on to the most beautiful environments, which is Mother's Dwelling. And I put this map at number 1 on my last ranking map tier list. However, I've had to look at the level design a little bit more and realised, yes, this map is really good looking, but it's really got an issue with balancing. First off, I feel like killers that have any projectiles, such as the Huntress or Deathslinger, will do really well on this map, as it has plenty of open areas. For survivors, there are some very strong pallet loops as well. Some people can utilise the cabin in the middle very well while looping as well. Not only that, but the main generator can be annoying for killers to get up to, because all the survivor has to do is jump off into safety where there's pallets, and the killer will have to go all the way up the stairs and then find out they're already gone. This map is incredibly huge, and I think the biggest map in the game, which is going to make it a big issue for killers. As a killer, I would highly suggest bring a Corrupt Intervention and bring a killer such as the Huntress to stop survivors doing the gen on the top of the cabin. As a survivor, bringing Balanced Landing will be very enjoyable for you, as you've got the main cabin, a small house, and hills to use that perk. Now, I can't talk about Red Forest without adding the beautiful map Temple of Purgation, which is the other Red Forest map realm. And I think right next to Midwich, this is one of the best looking maps in the game. The temple is absolutely huge, and the setting is really nice inside. Did I mention that it has an extra chest inside the temple? Even I didn't know that. Much like the other map, this is a relatively big map, which is of course going to be a problem for certain killers. which makes you think that killers might slug a little bit more on larger maps. This can be really beneficial as well, because if you slug them, then a survivor on the opposite side of the map is going to have to come all the way over to save them. So I guess there is some positives in a large map for killers. I feel that the pallets on this map are very good. There are plenty of good pallets to loop with, and there are barely any bad ones except maybe in the middle. Killers might struggle on this map, and so I would suggest bringing a killer that could move fast, such as the Spirit or Wraith. And for survivors, it is a good idea to bring Sprint Burst so you can get somewhere safe, and honestly, with such a large map, you're going to need it. Now we're moving into the more good maps, starting off with Wretched Shop. This is personally the best auto haven map for me personally. I feel like this is very thematic to have a car shop with a bunch of scrap all over the place, which is pretty cool. It's a decent sized map, so it's not too big, not too small, and the level design is pretty balanced in my opinion. It can be good for survivors, as there is plenty of jungle gyms and plenty of pallets around the sides of the car shop, but it's also great for killers, as the basement it mainly spawns in the middle, and the middle itself can be good for killers as there is a lack of protection within the car shop itself. The only problem is the dead zones, much like the other auto haven maps. I think playing as the Death Slinger or Huntress will be great on this map due to the dead zones as well. For survivors, I would bring Sprint Burst or Spine Chill, might be necessary to keep you protected from those dead zones while doing gens. Coming up to the top 5 maps, we're now starting off strong with Ironworks of Misery. Being a fantastic centerpiece on the map is a large factory, can be both beneficial for both the killer and the survivor, as with the right perks can be powerful for either side. More for the survivor's side, because you will have to destroy the breakable door that is on the top to stop major looping. It has some great jungle gyms and pallets around the outer sides of the map too. This map is more survivor sided than killer, but I can see it being quite enjoyable for both sides. Playing as the nurse will be very beneficial, or the huntress, especially around the factory area. And for survivor, bringing balanced landing will be your best friend. At number 4, we have Disturbed Ward. The remake has made this map filled with atmosphere, and it's such a great map where it feels like you're actually playing a horror game. Sometimes you can get lost finding gens sometimes, and playing as a stealthy killer is going to be very enjoyable. There is a big issue with dead zones everywhere, but with the revamp it has reduced this quite a lot. The middle used to be a powerful loop for survivors, and it still is, but it has become a little bit more manageable for killers. As a killer, you will need to play someone relatively fast, such as the Hillbilly or Oni, but Huntress and Deathslinger can be good as well. For survivor, I would bring Sprint Burst for getting to safety when it's limited, or bring Balanced Landing if you find yourself being near the middle a lot. At number 3, we have Cold Tower. It may not be my favourite Macmillan map in terms of its aesthetics, but for its level design, it is very balanced. I don't really hear too many people complain about this map from either the survivor or the killer's side. It's one of the smallest maps, which makes all killers pretty viable, and for survivors, depending on the RNG, it has some very strong loops. It doesn't have any dead zones, and the 3-genning isn't really a problem, so it has a lot of qualities going on. The only thing really letting it down is its atmosphere. I feel like it's pretty uninspiring compared to other maps on this list, but I respect how this map is pretty good for both the killer and survivor, which is pretty rare. As a killer, there isn't a specific one, but the Trapper will be fun, or the Legion, as it's easy to get everyone to be injured. For survivor, there isn't really any specific perk, but bringing the Vault build is always nice. At number 2, we have Rancid Abattoir. If you haven't noticed, I really hate all the farm maps due to the corn. However, this map doesn't have corn everywhere, which is a godsend, which means that other killers will be a lot more viable. It is a relatively small map as well, being the 3rd smallest map in the game, and I'm sure that you see a theme here that smaller maps are generally a lot better. It doesn't really have any dead zones, and plenty of sturdy pallet loops, and even jungle gems right next to the cow tree most of the time, which makes this a great survivor map. The main advantage for killers is that the small map makes some pallets unsafe. The killer can patrol the generators pretty well too, so the pressure can be made as well. Most killers are viable on this map, but the clown or the trapper might be good, especially around the abattoir itself. For survivor, any perk is nice. You can bring fixated if you want to keep stealthy, or bring dead hard to keep the loops going. Now finally, At number 1, we have the cloud map, which is Father Campbell's Chapel. I don't know many people that dislike this map. It has a fantastic atmosphere and it has recently been revamped, so it looks so much more ominous and eerie and isolated, and it's just, oh, it's so good. This map is both good for Survivor and Killer. Survivors have plenty of places to loop, and Killers can deal with loops in the middle of the map. Killers are choosing what killer to take is also heavily diverse as well. The Trapper is really good for the long grass. Stealthy Killers have a great way to hit survivors near gens. Huntresses have good distances as there's lots of open area. This map is just very versatile. It's also a pretty average sized map as well, which also benefits both Survivor and Killer. So a suggestion as a Killer, there isn't really one because pretty much all Killers are really good on this map. But for Survivor, I would suggest bringing maybe Balanced Landing for the middle part, and as it will help with the looping. So that is every single realm in Dead by Daylight. If you got this far, I really appreciate it so much. Make sure to give it a like and tell me what your best and worst map is, and maybe we can get a discussion going on. I'll try to reply to every comment that I can. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.